Hey, Steve, and welcome to the Life Shift Mastery podcast. It's great to have you on. I'm glad we were able to kind of make this happen. If you don't mind, as I always tell our guests, please just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself, kind of what you do, and then we'll go from there.
I appreciate it, Pete. My name's Steve Dillhoff. Been doing real estate for about 20 some years now, and I'm a financial advisor by trade. And my wife and I started doing this quite a while ago when we decided to do that. We got 4 kids and 2 grandkids, and just kind of been plugging along these years.
Okay, so real estate's kind of a side hustle for you that you've kind of developed and become an expert in over the past couple of years.
Yeah, we started back in 2006 is when we started doing it. Had a goal to be at a certain spot, and then we hit that goal, and then we've continued to grow since then.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, obviously with 18 years of experience and probably 20 combined with getting into real estate, there's a wealth of information here. And I think in today's world, you can find information on whatever you're interested in, but getting solid and credible information from someone who's actually looking to help you and benefits you can be harder to find. You know, a lot of people, they'll put out a video and it's just their information and they're trying to get someone to buy a course, or they're just trying to get you to, do something else or sponsor. So having you on to really share what's worked for you over the past 20 years and help young investors is really what we want to focus on today.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, when it comes to understanding real estate and the basics of it all, kind of step one, what are the key differences between buying a home for personal use and then maybe investing in real estate?
I think when you're buying a house, you're looking at it for the return is enjoyment. You're looking at it for what you're going to benefit, what you're going to enjoy when you're entertaining, having people over, if you're married, if your spouse likes it or what have you. Whereas when you're doing return for an investment, it's really about just making money, making that profit on it, or to protect yourself against major losses. You might not even like the neighborhood. You might not want to live in that neighborhood. You're not looking at it for personal enjoyment. You might say the rooms are too small. But when you're looking at an investment, it's really about, is it going to fulfill its goal to make you money? Whereas on a house that you're going to live in, it's almost the opposite. It's strictly just about, are you going to enjoy this area? Do you like the neighborhood? Do you like the woodwork? It's personally rewarding as opposed to profitable.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. I would say probably more when it comes to those two, the differentiation personal versus profitable.
Correct.
Okay. Awesome. So let's kind of role play for a minute here, or at least I will. Well, it's really not even role play, it's real life, right? I'm a 22-year-old man and about to turn 23. I want to get into real estate while I'm younger. What is the first step? Or I guess, what should someone consider when choosing a location for their first real estate investment? What are some of the maybe even sorry to keep adding on, but what are maybe some of the misconceptions? And it's like right off the bat, hey, if you're trying to start in real estate, you need to know this.
I think the first thing you need to look at realistically is what's realistic in your budget. It'd be great to sit there and say I'm going to go buy a $400,000 apartment complex, but if you go and you sit there and say realistically I'm going to be looking in a smaller area, you got to be realistic about what your income is going to be, what your assets are going to be, what you can get a loan for, because the first step is usually the hardest, because you got to be able to show that you can afford this house. So if you're going to get a mortgage for it or what have you, my wife and I, we started because we kept our first house when we moved to the next house. That was our first rental, was we kept a house, and that was back in 2006. But if you wanted to go just buy an investment property, you got to be able to show that bank that you're going to be able to support that mortgage and that you're going to be able to support that income. So you need to know what you're looking at. So that, are you looking in $100,000 range, or a 50,000 or a 250,000? Then you can start figuring out what neighborhoods you can do, because you don't want to look at $200,000 houses if realistically you're only going to be able to be in the $150,000 range.
Okay. Yeah. So really, it depends on how much you have to work with to start with. What's your budget looking like?
Correct. I would say the first thing you have to do is be realistic and look at your finances and say, what are my options? If I was starting off as a young person and I didn't have a spouse, I would be looking in something that I could use as my primary residence, maybe a duplex or a multi-unit, because the rules are a little bit more generous for financing on your regular house as opposed to a rental property. My wife and I, when we kept our first house as a rental, and we bought the next house, we could claim that it was our primary residence. So when we got financing, those hurdles are easier than if you come out and say, I want to buy a straight investment property.
Okay. In regards to you talking about different apartment complexes and such, what are the different paths in real estate? For example, residential, commercial, flipping, rentals. Can you explain kind of what that's all about?
The typical ones, you've got residential rentals and you got commercial rentals, and residentials are going to be for people to live in, and commercials are going to be for businesses and what have you. Flipping is more where you're just buying the house, fixing it up, and selling it. That's about speed and efficiency of doing it. It's a great way to make money. It's kind of time consuming though, because the longer you hold it, the longer your holding costs are. So you do have to move kind of quick. I've tried it. It's not my forte. I've stayed in the single family and multi-unit rentals, making longer term profits and growing my net worth by having those properties. Whereas flipping a house is going to be more about, let me buy the $50,000 house, fix it up, sell it for 100 and a quarter or something like that. Those are harder to get loans for, because a lot of times the really good values or the good opportunities are not going to get a loan because there's no kitchen or there's no bathroom or something. But they're not going to find traditional funding, so you might have to do hard money lending or something else. But they still go back to the criteria of your experience. But when you're looking at the flipping, that's one way. I personally subscribe to the Burr method: the buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. I buy the ugly houses that don't get financing. So I take my line of credit, I go buy this house, I fix it up, I rent it out, then I'll go refinance it to pull my equity back out and keep repeating the process. That's kind of what my wife and I have done over the years. It's a slower process, but it is kind of it's not my primary business is real estate. So we've been doing it as a side thing. And it's grown. We got about 20 houses. We count doors. So we've got about 49 doors between all those. So if a duplex would be one house, two doors. We typically buy lower valued houses that rent real well, as opposed to the other side is I'm buying a house that I'm going to rent with hopefully a lot of growth. If you're going to be in a higher end area, a Washington Township or a Springboro or whatever, you're looking at the growth of that house in addition to the rents. Whereas if you buy, like I'm traditionally in, Belmont, Dayton, those type of areas, I get a better return right away, but there's not as much growth on that house. So that's what we do on my wife and I's process.
Okay. No, yeah, thanks for sharing that. So let's say, well, okay, I don't know what everyone's budget looks like, but let's say you know where your starting budget is and you've accurately chosen, or you're looking at a place that, okay, this is within my budget to start. Can you explain the process of purchasing a property? And I know there's a lot that goes into that, but maybe from finding a listing to even considering the location. I know you talked about looking for growth or whether you're looking for immediate returns. Kind of explain maybe from your own, your start. If you have your budget, what's the first thing I need to start doing to actually get involved in real estate?
I think you take a step back and say, what kind of investor am I going to want to be? What kind of houses am I going to want to be in? Myself, like I said, we go with the houses that are not the highest end, but rent for a very good value. A $100,000 house that rents out for $1,200 a month. That's in my wheelhouse. The $250,000 house that rents for $2,500 a month. That's outside my wheelhouse. So you got to figure out what area you want to be in. I learned by lesson the hard way. I find an area that I want to work in, and that's kind of where I do. My areas are Belmont, East Dayton, and West Dayton. It's those type of areas that we can function in. You got to know your area well. And then you got to look and say, do I want to buy what we call a turnkey, where I buy a property, it's already fixed up. I just literally buy the thing and we put a tenant in there. It's all fixed up. It's all pretty. It's all ready to go. And we just do that. Or am I buying the ugly one that I'm fixing up? My wife's and my business model, and it's to basically buy the fixer uppers, because I want to go in and have the new hot water heater, the new HVAC, the new roof. Then I have a good starting spot as long as it's priced right. If it's not priced right, that's one of the biggest mistakes people make, is they overpay to buy something. I'd rather have my team fix the place up so I know that it was done right, as opposed to buying what maybe somebody who is a house flipper, nothing against house flipping, but some people have tended to cut corners, and then therefore they can make it look pretty and make it look nice. And if you buy it as an investor and somebody didn't fix it as thoroughly as what it should have been, but it looks good. You can sometimes get those headaches. So I personally would rather have the fixer upper that I know is done right, so that when I rent it out, I'm not going to have those extra problems, because that maintenance headache is something I would rather know ahead of time. And on a personal basis, I would rather know what went into the walls and what went into the plumbing and what went into the electrical, and make sure that I know my guys do it right, as opposed to somebody else maybe didn't. It doesn't remove all problems, but it does make me feel a little bit more comfortable when I'm renting it out then.
Right. So, and I think that's obviously a very wise way of doing it. However, if when you were just starting out, did you still go for the uglier property that needed some fixing up for your first property before
My
you had this team, or did you always have the team who can do it the way you want it?
No, the first property I ever bought, except for the one where we moved out of our house and kept us around, the first property I bought as an investment property was a three one bedroom apartment building. There was three one bedroom units. It's in Belmont, and it was dated. It was structurally sound. It was a brick building. I like brick buildings. They tend to have pretty good setups there, and you don't have as much hiding of stuff. Three one bedrooms, 500 square foot per unit, and at the time I think they were renting for like $295 a month, and I paid, I think, 70,000 for the house. And every time somebody moved out, I would go in there, and I was the people going in there. I was the guy going in and repainting. I was the guy. I think one thing you have to do is admit your weaknesses and know where your skills are capped. I don't mess with electric, and I don't like plumbing. I can do plumbing, but I don't like it. But you got to know where your strengths and weaknesses are. And that's kind of a self-evaluation. And sometimes that's a hard thing, but it's better to know where your weaknesses are. And then you're right. You don't have a team when you start off. When you only got one property, you have very little buying power. So you try to find somebody. And if you find an electrician, you find a plumber that does good work. And sometimes there's a guy or a lady starting off, and they're willing to work with you, with the goal that as you grow, they're going to work with you. And to this day, my contractors, a lot of them have been with me for well over 10 years. And my electrician who was in here today, he's been doing work for me since 2010. So Corey's a great guy, and he does good work. So you want to have people that you trust, that you do, but know where your limitations. But I was the guy painting. I was the guy pulling up carpet. I was the guy. I would do the demo to help save myself some money, but then have other people that would come in and be able to help with that. And there's a lot of people like me that would know contacts that would be glad to share it. There's a lot of you want to find a more seasoned investor who's done that, because all joking aside, when I'm dead or something, I'm going to need somebody to sell my properties to. A guy that mentored me told me that. He's like, I'll help you because I need somebody to buy my properties when I'm getting out of this. And it really makes a lot of sense that, we need buyers down the road that aren't necessarily, in the business right now, but somebody like yourself, when I get to be 80 years old and I'm wanting to sell, I need somebody like you who's going to come in and want to buy it. So, I don't mind sharing my connections or my people or my this or my that, because that's good for all of us.
Right. No, I think that's a smart approach. I know a lot of CEOs or high performers will say, like, people think withholding knowledge, it makes people want it more. But it's funny, like when you share your knowledge and when you try to help others, it's amazing the blessings you receive in return. So,
Well, yeah, absolutely. And you also get connections, because there's deals that I pass on that if I know somebody else is wanting, and I know other investors who fed me leads to, right now, for example, I got three projects. If somebody brings me a lead right now, I don't have the capacity to do a fourth one, because I'm know your limits. I'm only able to do this much. So I would pass on something right now.
okay, yeah, and that's actually one of the questions I was going to ask further down the line. So I'll deviate quickly to ask that. I know you mentioned it. How important would you say it is to have a mentor when it comes to real estate? Is that something that you would prioritize, trying to find someone who's actually seasoned, and obviously you want to glean information from whoever you can, but would you say getting a mentor would be like a pretty high priority?
I know it helped me tremendously, and I think that there's a lot of pitfalls that I've experienced. And my dad used to always say, "Learn from other people's mistakes. You don't have time to make them all yourself." I think if you could find somebody to work with, it can be a mutually beneficial for both parties' relationship, to be able to, for lack of a better words, job shadow or ask them, "Hey, why did you pick this? Or how did you pick this? Or what did you go?" It doesn't remove all the obstacles, but it does. It's like walking down the street and somebody points out a pothole. It's going to help you avoid some pitfalls, because they might know something you don't, because you haven't experienced. I used to do certain things that I don't do anymore because I've learned the hard way. Hey, don't do that. It's going to bite you in the backside, and it's going to overcost you way too much money. it's better to learn those things. Now, you might take that information and decide to do it anyway, but having somebody to guide or show you or to work with you, I've had people that we went through the whole process together just so they could see how I picked stuff and why I picked it, and then they would ask questions and why didn't you do this or why did you? And I've learned some things because, like, it's a different time. And I started doing this was 16 years ago. There's new things, technology, Zillow's bringing different opportunities. There's all kinds of things out there that we can learn from each other.
Okay. Yeah. No, I like that. I know you said you bought your first brick property, three places and one house, and you said you bought it for 70,000. Pretty rudimentary question here, but how do you assess whether a property is likely to appreciate in value over time? And then, what is the difference between a buyer's market and a seller's market, and how should the investor approach both of those?
Okay. Um, as for valuing the areas, I buy houses in neighborhoods that I know. And the reason is because I can look at those neighborhoods and say, are these going up? Are these going down? I have a very rudimentary check. I call it my porch test. And I drive around the neighborhood before I ever buy a house. I look at all the porches. And if the porches look bad and if the porches all look torn up, I usually try to avoid those neighborhoods because predominantly they're not appreciating. They're not this. Most of the houses I buy, I'm not looking for great appreciation. I'm looking for them to hold their value, appreciate at an inflation rate. But I look for a 1 to 2% rate of return on the rent. So a $70,000 house, I would look to be getting $700 a month out of because it's the 1% rule, if you will. So somewhere between $700 to $1,400 is what I would be looking to get monthly rent. That one was generating, for round numbers, like $300 a month per unit. So it was 900. I was looking at it like a value stock. This is one that's going to give me monthly cash flows for two reasons that's important to me. One is I didn't have a ton of money, so I didn't want to have a lot of cash going out of my pocket. And I had another old investor told me, when you buy a 3 unit, you want two of the units to be able to pay for the mortgage. So that way, if somebody does leave, you are okay because you still had it. Now, if two people left, now you're cash flow negative.
Right.
But by having that there, whereas some people would buy a house in a neighborhood that's appreciating, and that's where you're looking for where's the neighborhood growing, what's expanding, and that's not my forte. So I really wouldn't be great there. But you would consult a real estate agent and maybe ask them, hey, what areas are growing, which ones are holding their values, which ones are depreciating, and you look at neighborhoods and you do that. As for a buyer's and a seller's market, it's just supply and demand. A buyer's market basically means there's a whole lot of sellers out there, so you got your pick of the litter. There's 15 houses and 10 buyers, so the prices are going to be lower. Whereas with a seller's market, there's 15 buyers and only 10 sellers, so the prices are going to be a little bit higher. Which is what we've seen here recently. Is we've seen a lot of houses, especially those houses that are more moderate in values, the ones 150 and lower. There's about a 16 million household shortage in America of moderate houses. So the area that I like to play in is in that area because I'm looking at it thinking, I don't think these houses are going to go down a lot in value over time because there's a supply demand issue. Right now, we're undersupplied on those moderate houses. The builders are only building $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 houses because there's a lot more profit margin in there. You have a larger demographic growing and actually a shrinking housing population there because fires, tornadoes, all these things that are removing houses out of that area. So I think you're still sitting pretty nicely in those areas. And I like those because I look at it and I look at things and say, what could go wrong? If I had to sell this property, can I get out of it at least what I got into it? The more expensive ones, people make a lot of money. It's an area that I'm personally not comfortable with, so I tend to avoid it because I know right now if you told me I had to sell one of my houses, I could sell one of the houses and walk away with my mortgage paid and money in my pocket on every house I have. And that's how I look at it, is to make sure my protected. When you're looking at risk and you're looking at buying your first house, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go this many dollars in debt, and what if that tenant tears it up? And my first tenant, I would lose sleep over it. I would worry about it. What if they this, and what if they were late on their rent, and I start panicking because now I got to make my mortgage and that mortgage, and it stresses you out. So you got to look at what you're comfortable with on that.
Okay. And another question I was going to ask with that first property. Was there any negotiating to be done getting that 70,000? Do you have any tips for negotiating in regards to purchasing real estate?
On that one, there was no negotiating. It was an older gentleman. He said, "This is my price. Take it or leave it." And I was younger at that. What I tend to look for personally is, because I'm looking for the fixer uppers and the whatevers. You're usually more in a demographic where it's all about numbers and everybody knows the numbers. Where you run into it, the turnkey ones, my personal experience has been they're a little bit more competitive on their bidding, because that's where you've got the people who might be wanting to live there, especially if it's a single family residence, as their regular house. The biggest thing with looking at your pricing is, what is this house really worth, and being able to walk away if it's not there. I was on an auction the other day on a house that was literally right next door to mine. I had a price in mind because it was right next door to mine, and I knew what I bought mine for, and I it went right past that price, and it just kept going, and I laughed the whole way because that meant my house was worth more than I thought it was. So you got to know your prices and know where your limits are, because remember, it's all about money on an investment property. You don't want to overpay for things, and you got to be willing to walk away. If you're not willing to walk away, you're going to get burned at some point.
Okay. Um, from an audience, from a listener's perspective, if I was listening to this, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the takeaways I'm getting from this so far, if I want to get into real estate, I see all this stuff online about it. I want to do it the right way, and I have the right mindset, right? Because you and I both know, I've been guilty of it. You see someone like yourself, you have 49 doors, 20 properties. I'm like, oh, that sounds amazing. And that's been, over the course of 18, 20 years. So the first step is you need to know how much you're working with,
Right.
what's your budget. Then you're looking for the kind of neighborhood you want to get into. It sounds like the safe route is find a place that will hold its value, not just constantly appreciating, because that could get expensive, but find a place that will hold its value. If you needed to sell, you could. Maybe get something that is a fixer upper if you have the skills, or if you have the connections, or you're willing to build them. Kind of go into that, research a property, and kind of go from there, and then you start building from there. Would you say that's an accurate representation so far?
I would say it's an accurate representation of what worked for me.
Okay.
I've known other people who made really good money going into those areas. And I think the big thing is you got to do a self evaluation and say, what are your strengths and what are your limits? What concerns you? I know people who've done very well flipping houses because they're flipping every once a month, every other month. They're buying and selling, and they're making $10,000-$15,000 on that flip, and that's great for them. I don't have that skill set to be able to do. I think that's where you got to do that self evaluation. And when you're looking for a mentor, you're looking for somebody, finding somebody with the style or the investment strategy that you're looking for to mimic. I don't think you'd want to come to me if you want to be a house flipper, because I would be a horrible person. I've tried it a couple times. I do okay. It's not my forte. I would rather make $4,000 a year for the next 30 years than I would to make 15 in 2 months, because then that means I got to find another project to do.
Right.
So you got to find out what you're looking to accomplish and what you're wanting to do. All of them work. I mean, I know some very successful people who do flipping. I know successful people who've done the buy and wait till the market expands and grows. I've known very successful people doing it lots of different ways. For me and my wife, we looked at it and said, this is not my full-time job. This is a side thing. I can do this and let these grow. I typically rent. I had an old guy told me, rent for a little bit below market and be picky about who you put in your property. I buy the houses in a neighborhood. I rent for $50 below market or $100 below market. My tenants love me. They don't hardly ever leave unless they die, or if they get married, or if they start having kids. My tenants, I've had people who've literally moved from my 1 bedrooms to my 3 bedrooms to stay with me, and they don't want to leave because I take care of them, and it's a win-win that they stay in the property, they take care of it. But that's what works for me, and that's what worked for me and my wife's, and what worked our comfort level. But you can do very successful doing it the other way too.
Right. Yes. No, that's a good point to make. What are some financial principles that you think are essential, or you believe are essential for the success in real estate investing? Maybe from more of budgeting perspective, or just a money mindset perspective.
I think the biggest thing to consider on that is that you need to, with your properties, know what's left to break and what enough to fix. When you own a house, you're budgeting for a water heater, or you're budgeting for my garbage disposal might work. I'm budgeting for 25 garbage disposals, or I'm budgeting, for this many, doors or whatever else. And you're not able to control how they're being taken care of. Whereas at my house, we're very careful about what we put down the garbage disposal. But you got a budget for those repairs, and you need to have a reserve for that, so that when the time comes that that happens, you've got the money that it doesn't freak you out. So setting money aside out of the rents to be there. If you think about what rent makes up, it makes up the mortgage, it makes up the taxes, it makes up the insurance, it makes up the repairs, and it makes up the profit. Those are all pieces that go into what you charge as rent. And so many times people start taking that money and using it all, and then the garbage disposal or the hot water heater or this, that, or the other, goes out. So like with each one of my properties, I have a list of like when those things were put in or how they are. And I've been doing it long enough. It's like, okay, that hot water heater I fixed 10 years ago, they're about ready to go out again. And if you don't budget for it, it freaks you out and panics you, and it stresses you out. The good news is that as you get more properties, it becomes a little bit less stressful, because you're figuring that they're not all going to break on the same day. So you've got the cash flows and what have you coming in monthly to do that. But I think you definitely have to look at your financial wherewithal and say, does my personal budget allow me to do this, or do I need to be setting aside and putting it in a separate repair budget account? Roofs are going to go out. When I started it, I was setting aside money for the roof and for the this. And as a percentage, it was a rather large percentage, because I only had the one property. So I had to be careful. But now that I got more properties, as a percentage, I'm still setting aside money for it. But as a percentage, it's not quite as big, because now I've got enough cash flows to be able to repair a water heater that it won't, I won't like it, but I can afford to repair a water heater just on the monthly cash flows type of situation.
Right. What strategies have you used to grow your real estate portfolio efficiently? So maybe scaling it from 1 to 5, 5 to 10, so on and so forth. Are there any strategies that you use to grow your real estate? Maybe that's patience, um,
I think that it's been escalating faster now that things are going on for, when I first started, it was one 3-bedroom apartment. That's all it was. And then we bought another one because, bluntly, my cash flows, I had 4 kids, and the cash flows and the this and the that. And we were always wanting to make sure that we didn't have any kind of extra burden in case something did go wrong or what have you. So we started off slow. We'd buy one a year type of thing for a while. Then we started buying 2 a year. And then we started buying 2 a year. And then after a while, the part of the networking and the associating and what have you, those people who are looking at getting out of the market that you started associating with 18 years ago, they start, for lack of better words, getting out of the business. And all of a sudden, the last few that I've bought, people would come to me with those because they knew what my model was, and they knew who I was, and they knew that those things. And so the last few properties I've bought, honestly, I really wasn't even proactively looking. It's people were bringing them to me. And that's kind of one of those things that as you get bigger, and when you get a little bit bigger, you start getting buying power at the Home Depots, you get buying power at those. There's some saving mechanisms where when you're remodeling a house, you go get the Home Depot or the Lowe's and you get a contractor discount, but you got to go jump through some hoops. But, you work with somebody who knows these people, they put you in contact with their contact, and you get some discounts, and so you get a little bit bigger, you get to be a bigger player. I've gotten my insurance agents called me with houses. The attorney in my buildings called me with houses. Real estate agents call me with houses. It's really, that networking really brings you some opportunities, but you got to know you got to be able to describe who you are and what your niche is. That way they know what they're going to send you.
Okay. And what are some signs that it might be time to sell and reinvest somewhere else? Do you ever have I know your kind of line is places that hold their value, but have you ever had to sell a property? You said, hey, it's time to reinvest and move on from somewhere else.
On the flipping ones, those were always just to buy and sell. I didn't do great. Typically my sales, I haven't really sold because I'm still in the accumulation phase. Then I'd sit there, have to argue, why am I selling? And I'd be buying in the same neighborhood. The ones I've sold, I won't say it was a mistake, but I bought outside my core area. My core area was here, and I bought one out in Beaver Creek. Beaver Creek's a great area. But every time I needed to fix something, it was a longer trip. It was a longer this. It wasn't convenient. So I sold that house because it was inconvenient. We made money. We did this. We did that. But so far, I really haven't been a seller of my rental properties. I've done some where I will sell it to the tenant. I've had some tenants come to me and say, would you consider selling? And one of my personal goals is to help people. So it doesn't make a financial decision, but it makes me happy is to be able that if that person wants to own that house. I've sold probably 2 or 3 of my houses, and I've got a couple on rent to owns where people can own the house, but that's a personal thing that is something my wife and I want to do. It's not necessarily from a financial, but we looked at it and said, if we sold this, the real estate commissions, it needs these repairs still left, and I made sure to disclose all that to them. And I've had some people who wanted to become homeowners, and on a personal basis, we took that money and redeployed it somewhere else, but it was more for personal joy than it was because it reached a capacity. But most of the areas I'm in, I'm not looking for that appreciation factor. It's not like a growth stock. It's more like a value stock.
Okay.
And that house that I was renting out before for $300 that I bought for $70, I'm now getting like $600 a month for those same apartments because of inflation. And on paper, it's worth probably $160,000. But I'm just getting that cash flows. The biggest time you make money on rentals is when you sell them or when they're paid off. I'm looking for when they all get paid off is the benefit that I'm looking for primarily. So I've got a 4% mortgage on some of these that I bought umpteen years ago, and that was with the higher interest rate for being an investment property. I have a $500 house payment, and I'm collecting $1,800 a month. And I don't have the headache of rebuilding a property. So,
Right.
and realistically, I've refinanced some of the properties to pull the money out. Instead of selling them, I just refinance it to pull my resources to go buy the next one. So like the last house I bought, we bought for 62.5. We put 40 into it, and we're in the process of refinancing it. I'll pull my 100 back out of it. And so I'm going to be having my money, but I'm going to have a house with 50,000 of equity, and I'm going to be collecting rent on that of $1,300 a month, and my payment will be $800 or $900. So we'll put a couple bucks in our pocket every month. But at that point, I have none of my money. That's the Burr method. We bought it, we rehabbed it, we rented it, we're going to refinance it, and then once that closes, we'll go repeat it and do it again. So it's kind of like selling it, but not selling it. So I also don't have the tax consequence of selling it either. Now you can do 1031 exchanges if you're doing that game. I personally just kind of refinance them and pull my cash out that way.
Okay. So really, I mean, and the overarching goal is you put, some money in and you're looking to eventually get that money back.
I was sharing with you a little bit earlier, but my mentor gave me this little sheet here where it basically was the goal is that you put in, some money and you pull out lots of money. And at the end of the day, I don't want to oversimplify it, but as an investment with real estate, I'm looking for that return. Now, when you're starting off, you don't value your time a whole lot because you're doing a lot of the work, but you're building that legacy, you're building up that core. Now I'm to the point where the guys don't really, they like me there, but I'm the cleaner upper. I'm demo, I can pull stuff off walls, but my skill set is greatly below there. So I hire people to do a lot of the stuff, but I still enjoy going out and helping and do. But it really boils down to that your goal is to pull more money out of this than what you put into it. So on my Burr method, I'm into the one house for 100, but if I pull 100 back out of it, I really have none of my money in there anymore. And if I'm making $200-300 a month and I've got 50,000 left worth of equity, my rate of return is really good.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, Steve. At Life Shift here, our goal is to help men become the best versions of themselves. And that's what we do. And this podcast is a facet of that, to educate men, to educate, women and men, whoever's listening, on topics that are sort of tough to navigate. And we want to gain insights from other people. One of the biggest things that's a passion of ours, it's the concrete of our foundation, is productivity. And I love being around high performers, and I love learning more about productivity hacks and habits and structured routines, that kind of thing. Obviously, you're a high performer. I know this real estate you would think is your full-time job, but it's a side hustle. I know you do a lot of other charity work, and working, again, it gives you joy to help other people. What are some high productivity routines, whatever that looks like to you, that help you keep everything intact, managing all these properties, but keeping up with teams? I don't want to over explain it for you, but what are some routines or some habits that you have that help you be a high performer?
I think the first thing is willing to admit what your weaknesses are. For me, I am easily distracted. I go off on trails here, there, and yonder. So you can't see it, but on my desk there's a piece of paper that's taped down that says from 8 to 9 we do this, and 7 to 8 we do this, 8 to 9, and my day is very compartmentalized. And if something jumps up from for property management is from 8 to 9. My landscape company is from 7 to 8, and then my regular job is from 9 to 3, and then from 3 to 4 it's cleaning up and tidying up. But if something jumps in on me for my estate plan or my real estate, it just goes in the folder and I'll deal with it tomorrow, unless it's an emergency thing. If it's an emergency, obviously those come into play. But for me, I have to really focus. I have a hard time focusing. So for me, I have to compartmentalize my pieces, because otherwise I will go all over the place and never really get anything done. So for me, it was first admitting that I need that structure. And then once I had it, my office manager knows to remind me nicely when I deviate from that, because if I don't do that, then nothing really gets done. So for me, I'm very structured with my times, and I need that. And so typically at the end of each hour, I have a 5-minute break. It's like a 55-minute time. And then I actually have a clock on my computer that I'll push the button on every once in a while if I'm deviating too much from it. I need that structure. And I think that first part is to admit what kind of time person you are. I'm a time waster. If I don't have that structure, I can keep myself occupied and not accomplish a daggone thing, or I can stay focused and structured on it. So for me, that's part of my process.
Okay. Yeah, I love that, Steve. I'm learning more and more about that. I've recently started, Google Calendar, planning out my days, and it's interesting. Like I'm a big proponent of getting into a flow state and starting early and getting some work done. There's a saying, I think it's where your focus flows, energy goes, or where your focus goes, energy flows. Just like once you get into that state, and if you have that, you can be really productive. And I know without a structured routine, a lot of times what people experience is something called analysis paralysis,
Mm-hmm.
where you have all these things to do and you're constantly trying to think of things, and that can get in the way too. So I love that. Really just structuring your routines, planning it so you stay on track and sticking to that routine.
And if you're a cheap son of a gun like me, you can go to the library's website and you can access LinkedIn's learning sections. And there's some time management courses there, but they're free if you go through the Dayton Metro Library. And
Okay.
I watch that probably every other year or so, just to remind myself why it's important, type of thing. But I think the first key is to figure out and admit where your strengths and weaknesses are.
Okay. If you were to kind of closing out here, if you were to leave maybe your younger self, or if you were to give any sort of advice, something you want to leave the audience with, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing I tell people that are younger is, why do you want to do this? What is its purpose? My goal was originally to have 4 properties. And the problem when you set a goal to be just a number, you hit that number and then it's now what? And if you're a wanting to grow, you just keep pushing more and more, but you don't really have the reason why you want to do it. So anybody who's wanting to get into real estate, I would ask, what is the purpose? What is the goal? Is it to have a certain lifestyle? Is it to have a certain this? Make that the goal, not just a certain amount of properties or a certain amount of revenue. Because when you hit a certain dollar amount or a certain amount of properties, and this is what I did, my goal was to have 4 properties. I hit that by the time I was like, I don't know, 35 or something. And I said, well, I can't quit. So I had to push harder. So I think asking yourself why you want that, what lifestyle that represents for you, or what that gives you or your family or whoever you're doing it for, so that when you get there, it doesn't mean you can't change. It make that the goal. I want more time with my family, or I want to be able to not work at a 9 to 5 job, or whatever it is you're wanting. Figure out that goal, and then figure out how real estate, if that's the direction you're going to go, how that's going to impact that or help you accomplish that goal. Don't make the goal to accumulate 10 properties or 15 doors or whatever it is. You kind of reverse engineer it. I want this lifestyle. It's going to take this much revenues or this much this, because at some point you're going to exceed it if you just want it to be a certain number of houses.
Okay. I like that. One of the things we always do on the podcast is ask our guest for a book recommendation. What would that be for you, Steve?
I was recommended this book by a mortgage guy. It's called The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews. Phenomenal book. And honestly, once again, I don't listen to a whole lot of books. And when I say read it, I listen to it. You can get it on a lot of audio places. I listen to that about every 2 years, and I made all my kids listen to it. And I've made a lot of I've strongly encouraged other people. And I even offer my tenants a discount on 1 month's rent if they read the book. That's how much I love that book. It's a very good book. The other book, that gentleman, I'm forgetting who it was, but Living Forward, I listened to his. He was one of the recommendations, one of your first
John
people.
Woods. John
Yep,
Woods.
that was a really good book. And honestly, that one and the Traveler's Gift are probably two of my favorite. I've listened to the Traveler's Gift numerous times, but I would say that would be the one I would recommend, since the other guy already recommended. But I would reiterate that his was a really good one too.
Okay, The Traveler's Gift, and then of course Living Forward. Okay, great reads, and you highly recommend it, so it must be a good one. Okay, Steve, thanks so much for joining this podcast, sharing your wealth of knowledge, and I know for me personally, you explained it in such a simple way. It gave me some really good tips going forward, and I think it'll help our viewers as well. So,
Good.
thanks for coming on. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.